Gone Girl isn't a thriller. It's a manual on psychological manipulation. Most people watch it or read it and walk away thinking Amy Dunne is simply a brilliant sociopath, a one-in-a-million anomaly, a character so extreme she could never exist in real life. But here's what nobody tells you. Every single tactic Amy uses on Nick has a clinical name, a documented pattern, a real psychological mechanism that researchers have studied for decades. Gillian Flynn didn't invent these tactics. She observed them, documented them, and then built a character around them so precise, so accurate, that reading the novel feels less like fiction and more like a case study you were never supposed to see. The manipulation in Gone Girl works on Nick, on the police, on the entire country, for the same reason it works in real life. Because it was designed to. Psychological manipulation, at its most sophisticated, is never loud. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't leave marks. It doesn't give you anything concrete to point to and say, there, that's where it started. That's precisely what makes it so effective and so devastating. Amy Dunne operates on 3 distinct levels of manipulation that layer on top of each other so seamlessly that by the time anyone realizes what's happening, the trap has already closed. The first level is the narrative. The second is the performance. The third, and most chilling, is the system. Each one is a real psychological tactic. Each one has been documented in clinical literature. And each one is something that doesn't require a genius sociopath to execute. It just requires someone who understands people better than people understand themselves. The most powerful weapon Amy uses isn't poison. It isn't a weapon at all in any traditional sense. It's a diary. And this is where Flynn does something that is both narratively brilliant and psychologically precise. The diary isn't just a plot device. It is the purest illustration of a manipulation tactic psychologists call narrative control. The deliberate construction of a story that positions the manipulator as victim and the target as perpetrator. Amy doesn't just lie. She builds an entire alternative reality, one document at a time, that is designed to be found, designed to be believed, designed to destroy. This is not impulsive. This is not emotional. This is what forensic psychologists call premeditated narrative construction. And it is one of the most documented tactics in cases of coercive control. The manipulator doesn't wait for the moment to strike. They build the case for months, sometimes years. Every entry in Amy's diary is a brick. And by the time anyone reads it, the prison is already built. What makes this tactic so effective in the novel and in real life is that it exploits something fundamental about how human beings process information. We are story creatures. We don't evaluate evidence neutrally. We find the narrative that makes sense and then interpret every piece of evidence through that narrative. Amy knew this. She built a story so coherent, so emotionally compelling, that once people stepped inside it, they couldn't see outside it anymore. There is a monologue in Gone Girl that stopped readers cold when the novel came out. The cool girl speech. Amy describes in precise clinical detail how she constructed an entire personality to become exactly what Nick wanted. Not because she wanted to please him, because she was studying him. And this is where the psychology becomes genuinely chilling. What Amy describes is a tactic that researchers studying dark triad personalities call mirroring. The deliberate reflection of a target's desires, values, and personality back at them in order to manufacture deep emotional attachment. The manipulator doesn't seduce you with who they are. They seduce you with who you are, reflected back at you in the most flattering possible light. Nick didn't fall in love with Amy. He fell in love with a version of himself that Amy showed him. And this is why the loss, when the performance ends, is so catastrophic. It isn't just the loss of a person. It is the loss of the self you thought you'd finally found. Clinical psychologists who work with survivors of narcissistic and sociopathic relationships describe this phase as the idealization stage. And the research on why it works comes down to something embarrassingly simple. We are most vulnerable to people who make us feel completely understood. Amy didn't manipulate Nick with tricks. She manipulated him with intimacy. False intimacy. Constructed intimacy. Intimacy that was a performance from the very first moment, but intimacy nonetheless. And the human brain cannot tell the difference until it is far too late. This is the part of Gone Girl that most people miss entirely. Because they're so focused on Amy and Nick, on the marriage, the disappearance, the diary, that they miss the larger target. Amy's true masterpiece isn't what she did to Nick. It's what she did to the system. The police, the media, the public, the entire machinery of social judgment that decides who is guilty and who is a victim. Amy understood something that most people never consciously articulate. That systems are not neutral. They are made of people. And people respond to narratives, not evidence. She didn't hack the investigation. She didn't bribe anyone. She didn't need to. She simply gave the system the story it was already looking for. A missing, beautiful woman. A cold, distant husband. A marriage with cracks. A pattern that fit perfectly into every true crime template the public had ever consumed. This tactic, giving an audience the narrative they're already primed to believe, is called confirmation bias exploitation. And Amy executed it with a precision that most actual manipulators never achieve, because most manipulators are driven by emotion. Amy was driven by architecture. She didn't react to the system. She designed around it. And the most disturbing thing about this, the thing that keeps this novel relevant long after the final page, is that the system never really catches up. Not because Amy is a genius, but because the system was never built to detect this kind of manipulation.
It was built to detect guilt. And Amy was never guilty of anything the system knew how to name. So here is what Gone Girl is actually about. Beneath the twists, the unreliable narrators, the satisfying shock of the ending. It's about the gap between what manipulation looks like in the movies. Explosive, obvious, detectable. And what it looks like in reality. Quiet, patient, invisible until it's finished. Amy Dunne isn't scary because she's extreme. She's scary because every tactic she uses is documented, is real, is being used right now by people far less intelligent than her, with results that are just as devastating. The cool girl performance, the narrative construction, the exploitation of a system built on confirmation bias rather than truth. None of this requires genius. It only requires the willingness to see people as systems to be understood, rather than human beings to be known. And that, quietly, is the most disturbing thing Gillian Flynn ever wrote.
If this video made you see Gone Girl differently, or made you think about someone you know a little uncomfortably, that's exactly what it was supposed to do. If you want more of this, more psychology, more dark literature, more of the things nobody explains properly, subscribing takes 2 seconds. And it means the next video finds you. If this one hit close to home, share it with someone who needs to see it. Sometimes the most important thing is just knowing the name for something you've already experienced. And if there's a book, a character, a story you think deserves this kind of breakdown, leave it in the comments. I read every single one.